In order to understand the complicated history between the United States and the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, better known as ISIS, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. The year is 1979. Afghanistan's first communist party, the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, the PDPA, had just overthrown the president a year prior and introduced a communist regime for the first time in Afghanistan's history. The PDPA instituted social reforms. They told women to take off their hijabs. They redistributed land from property owners. They enacted women's rights campaigns. And as a result, they ignited full-blown rebellion in the countryside. Tribes, clerics, defected soldiers, all formed militias known as the Mujahideen to fight against the atheist foreign-backed regime. The country was launched into civil war. And this was a problem for Moscow. For one, the Soviet Union didn't want to see communism fail. Two, they didn't trust this newly self-appointed communist leader. They felt like he was erratic and was beginning to lean more towards the West. And three, they didn't want an unstable regime sitting at its border. So on 24 December 1979, the Soviets launched a full-scale invasion. Thousands of Soviet troops entered Kabul. They stormed the presidential palace, and they ousted the president, and they installed a new one that was more to their liking. And this was obviously a problem for the United States. The U.S. has spent decades trying to contain communism, and now you got the Red Army pushing themselves further into Afghanistan, closer to the Persian Gulf, and closer to the oil routes that power the Western world. So the United States devised a plan. Instead of sending in troops and risking nuclear war, they would launch a covert CIA operation called Operation Cyclone. The plan was to arm the Afghan resistance, the Mujahideen, and to make the Soviet Union bleed out very slowly. This was the largest covert program in its history. Billions of dollars were funneled into Afghanistan through Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. In order to sell this to the world, they branded the resistance as freedom fighters. Word spread fast, and soon foreign fighters flooded in from Egypt, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, drawn by the call to jihad against the godless communists. Among them was a Saudi named Osama bin Laden, but we'll get back to him later. A decade goes by and the CIA continues to arm, train, and funnel billions of dollars to the Mujahideen until 1989 when the Soviet Union had finally had enough. They were finally bled dry, and they finally withdrew from Afghanistan. The U.S. declared victory. But for Afghanistan, it was just the beginning. When the Soviets left, they left a power vacuum behind them. For 10 years, the Mujahideen have fought against a common enemy. But now that that enemy was gone, the only thing left to fight over was Afghanistan itself. So the resistance splintered into several factions, and what was once a holy war turned into a civil war. But out of the chaos rose a new power, the Taliban. Taliban literally translates to the students. They came from Islamic religious schools in southern Afghanistan and from refugee camps in Pakistan. And they promised three things. They promised to end corruption in the government, they promised to restore order, and they promised to impose a pure Islamic law. And they did. By September 1996, they captured the capital of Kabul, and they declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And immediately the Taliban started restoring order their way. They instituted public executions. They banned music. They banned television. They banned photography. They banned Western clothing. They banned women from going to work or going to school. They instituted strict Sharia law. But to a country that was exhausted by war, peace, even if under Sharia law, was better than what they had gone through for over a decade. So now let's circle back to that Saudi Arabian freedom fighter that we were talking about, Osama bin Laden. After the war ended, Osama bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia as a hero. He was hailed and respected for funding and organizing Arab volunteers to fight alongside the Mujahideen. One thing I forgot to mention is that Osama bin Laden was very wealthy. He didn't have to fight. He wanted to fight. Bin Laden was very principled in his beliefs, and one of his beliefs was that the West was the enemy. And he did not believe in doing business with the enemy. And he believed this so much that when Iraq invaded Kuwait, he volunteered his veteran Arab fighters, the Mujahideen, many of whom have fought against the Soviets in Afghanistan, to defend Saudi Arabia and to prevent the need for non-Muslim troops. That's how much he did not want the United States on Saudi soil. And I have to admit, as a United States veteran who has been deployed to Saudi Arabia, who was actually there on 9/11, sorry, but I digress. Long story short, Saudi Arabia rejects his offer, and they accept U.S. troops to help defend Saudi Arabia against Iraq. Bin Laden saw the presence of U.S. troops on Saudi soil near Islam's holy cities as a national and religious betrayal. He publicly denounced the Saudi royal family. He accused them of corruption, hypocrisy, and submission to Western powers. Bin Laden was about that life. So the Saudi regime stripped him of his citizenship. They froze all of his assets, and they banned him from ever returning to Saudi Arabia again. And from that moment on, the United States was not his only enemy. Saudi Arabia was now Bin Laden's enemy as well. Now, during the time of this whole fallout with Saudi Arabia in 1991, Bin Laden first moves to Sudan. There he uses his personal fortune and his contacts in the construction industry to build businesses that doubled as fronts for recruiting and training Islamist fighters. He also began to create a new organization called The Base. The Base was essentially a database, a network of foreign veterans from the Afghanistan Jihad. It was like a Rolodex of trained, experienced, and loyal fighters ready to deploy anywhere Islam was under attack. In Arabic, base literally translates to Al-Qaeda. So this grew for about 5 years until 1996, when the United States and Saudi Arabia colluded to force Sudan to expel bin Laden from the country. So bin Laden's next stop was back to Afghanistan, where the Taliban was currently running the country with an iron fist. The Taliban saw bin Laden as a wealthy ally and a symbol of resistance, so he was welcomed with open arms. And from there, bin Laden's network of jihadist fighters, Al-Qaeda, evolved into an ideological movement. Its goal was to unite Muslims under one caliphate and to expel Western influence from all Muslim lands. This is when bin Laden issued his first public fatwa. It was titled The Declaration of War Against Americans Occupying the Land of Two Holy Places. These two holy places were Mecca and Medina, both located in Saudi Arabia. Mecca and Medina are considered to be off limits to non-Muslims, so he saw the presence of U.S. troops as a violation of sacred Islamic land. From there, bin Laden started launching a string of attacks on U.S. personnel abroad. In 1998, he bombed the U.S. Embassy in Kenya and Tanzania. In 2000, he bombed the USS Cole in Yemen. And of course, that brings us to the World Trade Center attacks on September 11th, 2001, one of the biggest conspiracies of our generation. Bin Laden took responsibility for it. That we know. The hijackers were trained in Al-Qaeda training camps. That we know. But there is a whole lot we don't know. There's a whole lot that doesn't add up, but that is a whole nother video for another time. So at this point, bin Laden is public enemy number one. The United States demands that the Taliban hand him over, but of course the Taliban refuses. So in October of 2001, the United States invades Afghanistan. They topple the Taliban regime, and they drive Al-Qaeda underground. Bin Laden escapes into Pakistan for the next few years, where he continues to issue audio and video messages, calling for attacks against the U.S. and its allies. Now let's fast forward to 2003. The United States, with the full support of Britain, has now invaded Iraq, which, by the way, had nothing to do with bin Laden or 9/11. They claimed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and links to both claims later to be proven untrue. What was proven true is that Iraq had oil, lots of oil. And what was also proven to be true is that France, Russia, and China had contracts on that oil, which explains why France, our ally, refused to assist in the invasion. And what's also true is that soon after the invasion, all those contracts by France and China and Russia were replaced by ExxonMobil, British Petroleum, and several other British and U.S. oil companies. They never found weapons of mass destruction. They never proved that Saddam was involved in terror activity, but they did manage to secure those oil contracts. Now, during the chaos of the Iraq War, a Jordanian militant named Abu Musab Zarqawi pledged loyalty and allegiance to bin Laden, and he created the AQI, the Iraqi branch of Al-Qaeda. And in 2006, Zarqawi was killed by a U.S. airstrike. Zarqawi was killed, but the AQI lived on and rebranded themselves as the Islamic State of Iraq, the ISI. And in 2011, when the Syrian civil war began, ISI fighters deployed into Syria and merged with the jihadists there, and they rebranded themselves once again as the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, otherwise known as ISIS. As far as bin Laden goes, the story that we are being told is that in 2011, he was killed in Pakistan during a military raid conducted by SEAL Team 6. We are told that he was shot, killed, and thrown into the ocean. No photos, no videos, no nothing. Just trust me, bro. That's the official narrative, and that's the origin story of ISIS.